everyone, it's Mrs. Harris, and I've got Jane here with me. Hi. I miss you all so much, and I especially miss having the chance to share Bible stories with you every Sunday like we do at Children's Church. So I thought maybe I would make some videos where I would share a Bible story with you, and this is the first one. And I've also sent your parents a list of some other activities you can do related to the story. So after you hear the story on the video, you can ask your parents about those activities and things too if you want, okay? So Jane's gonna just go and sit and listen, and she might help me some with the story. But if you remember, we've been going through the stories of the Old Testament in chronological order, that is, in time order, in the order that things happened. And so I don't have my nice timeline that I usually use to show you guys because it's at church and I can't get it. But if you remember, last year we started out in the book of Genesis, and we learned all about how God created the world, and we learned about people like Noah and Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, and finally we heard the story of Joseph and how the Israelites came to be in Egypt. And then in the fall, this past fall, we learned lots of stories from the book of Exodus. And I'm sure you remember we heard all about Moses and how God used him to help lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And we heard about how God did so many signs and wonders for the Israelites. Remember how he sent the plagues to try to convince Pharaoh that he should let the Israelites go. And then when Pharaoh did let the Israelites go, God parted the Red Sea, you remember that, so that the Israelites could pass through to safety. And he led the Israelites through the desert, and he was a cloud of smoke, a pillar of smoke during the day and a pillar of fire at night, leading the Israelites, and he provided them with food and water and just so many miraculous ways that God helped and provided for his people. But if you remember, we also heard about how the Israelites kept forgetting about God, and they would stop trusting him, and they would forget how much he loved them, and they would do things that made him unhappy and made them unhappy too. But that God just kept loving them, even though the Israelites could never follow him perfectly. He loved them, and he would always help them when they called out to him. And the final couple of stories that we heard about Joshua, and how Joshua finally, after Moses died, he led his people into the promised land. We heard about the Battle of Jericho. Remember when they marched around the city 7 times, and they had their trumpets, and they blew them, and the walls fell down, and we had fun acting that out. And then we heard also a story about Gideon, and we heard about how the Israelites, after Joshua died, they started to disobey God again, right? And so they fell into the hands of the Midianites, and then God raised up Gideon to be a deliverer. And we talked about how Gideon was a surprising deliverer because he was weak, small, and he was from the weakest clan of the Israelites, but God still used him because he wanted to show that it was his power, really. It was God's power that was saving the Israelites. And so Gideon led his people to victory over the Midianites. So that was the last story that we heard. So today we're going to move on to another story that, like Gideon, is also from a book called the Book of Judges in the Bible. And if you guys have a Bible nearby, your parents can maybe help you find it, or you can find it by yourself. This is Judges, and it starts in chapter 13. And there's one interesting thing that I want you guys to listen for in the story. That is, there is a riddle in this story. Do you guys know what a riddle is? So a riddle is when you ask someone kind of a tricky question, and they have to try and guess what the answer is. So, for example, if I were to say to you, I have a tongue but cannot speak, but I am known to move around, what would you guess? Do you want to think about that for a minute? I'll say it one more time. I have a tongue but cannot speak, but I'm known to move around. What would you guess? You can say it out loud if you want. Okay, so Jane knows. Come here, Jane. What do you think it is? Or she has a guess anyway. I didn't tell her. What's your guess?
I think it's a clock.
A clock. That's interesting. A clock doesn't have a tongue, I don't think, and it doesn't. It might. I can see how you would think it would move around, but the answer is actually a shoe, because a shoe has a tongue. You know, the part that's under the laces is called a tongue, and it's known to move around because when you put shoes on in order to walk around. So that's the kind of thing a riddle is, and our story today has a riddle in it. So I want you to listen closely to hear the riddle, and also, of course, like we always talk about in children's church, I want you to listen closely because God speaks to us through His Word and through His stories in the Bible, and so you will be able to hear Him if you make sure you have your listening ears on right now, right? So this is our story. So Gideon had died, and many years had gone by, and once again, of course, you won't be surprised to hear that the Israelites had forgotten about God and forgotten to trust Him and loved Him, and they started to do things that were evil in God's sight. And so because of that, they fell into the hands of the Philistines. Now, the Philistines were another group of people who lived near where the Israelites lived, and they were enemies to the Israelites. And they were now ruling over the Israelites, and the Israelites were scared of them. Now, among the Israelites, there was a man, and his name was Manoah. Now, this is our Manoah. You see him? And he had a wife. You don't know her name. The Bible doesn't tell us her name, but that's his wife, okay? And they were married, but they weren't able to have any children, and that made them kind of sad. They didn't have any children. But one day, Manoah's wife was out working in the field by herself, and suddenly an angel appeared to her, okay? And she was surprised, of course, and the angel said to her, "I know that you have not been able to have a child, but I'm here to tell you that you are going to have a child. And you are not ever going to cut his hair, and you are not ever going to drink alcohol or eat any unclean food, because this child is going to be set apart to God, and he's going to be what is called a Nazarite, and he is going to begin the process of liberating the Israelites from the Philistines." And then the angel left. And Manoah's wife was kind of amazed at what had happened, of course, and surprised. And so she ran and got her husband. And she said, "Husband, you're not going to believe what happened. I just had an angel appear to me, and he told me that we're going to have a child, a little boy. And he said I'm not supposed to cut his hair, and I'm not supposed to drink alcohol or eat any unclean food. But I don't know who he was. I didn't ask him who he was. I was so surprised." So Manoah decided to pray, and Manoah prayed, and he said, "Lord, will you please send the angel back to us so that we can ask him how we are supposed to raise this child?" So the Lord heard Manoah, and a few days later, I think, Manoah's wife was again by herself out in the field, and the angel reappeared. And so she went and got her husband, made sure he came this time. And the husband said, "Are you the one who told my wife that we're going to have a son?" And the angel said, "Yes, I am." And Manoah said, "Well, can you please tell us then how we are to raise the child? How does the Lord want us to raise this child?" And the angel said, "Well, you just need to do exactly what I told your wife before. You may not ever cut his hair or use any kind of razor on him, and you may not drink any alcohol or eat any unclean food." So Manoah said, "Well, thank you so much, and won't you please just stay with us so that we can prepare a meal for you to say thank you?" And the angel said, "Well, I'm not going to eat any of the food that you prepare for me, but if you want to make a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord." And Manoah said, "Well, then can you at least tell us your name? Tell us who you are?" And the angel said, because Manoah didn't realize this was an angel of the Lord yet. And the angel said, "Why do you ask me my name? It is beyond your understanding." Well, Manoah still wanted to make the meal for the angel, so he and his wife went off and they killed a young goat and they built a big fire in order to roast the goat on for the angel. And then something really amazing happened. They built the fire and the flame was going up from the fire, and suddenly the angel ascended in the flame. It ascended up to the heavens, and it disappeared. And when Manoah and his wife saw this, they were so amazed and so shocked, and they realized at that moment that that had to have come from God, that angel. And so they fell on their faces, and Manoah cried out, "We've seen the Lord, and we're sure to die." Because often when people in the Old Testament in the Bible see God, that's how they feel. They just feel so amazed that they've seen a sight of God, and they feel sure that they can't live after that. But Manoah's wife said, "No, Manoah, if the angel had wanted to kill us, he never would have accepted our offering, and he never would have told us the amazing things he told us about us having a son. And so I think we can just trust in God and wait and see what happens." So lo and behold, his wife was right, and they had their baby boy, and he grew up, and they did exactly what the angel told them. They never cut his hair. They didn't let him drink alcohol or eat any unclean food. And the child grew up. They had named him Samson, and he grew up to be a very, very strong and powerful man, unlike Gideon. So here is Samson. And as you can see, Samson has very, very long hair and a very, very long beard, because they never cut his hair like the angel told them to do. Right? So Samson grew up, and he was a grown man, and he was living with his parents. And one day he was out and about, and he saw a beautiful Philistine woman. Here she is. He saw this beautiful Philistine woman, and he fell in love with her, and he decided that he wanted her to be his wife. And so he went to his parents, and he said to them, "Parents, Mom and Dad, I have seen a Philistine woman, and she was so beautiful, and I want to marry her, and you have to get me her for a wife," because in those days your parents had to get your wife for you. You couldn't just do it by yourself. So Samson's parents, Manoah and his wife, said, "Samson, I don't know about this, or this doesn't sound like a good idea. Are you sure there isn't an Israelite woman that you could marry?" And Samson said, "No, I like this woman." And they said, "Are you sure about that? Because it really would probably be better if you married an Israelite woman." And Samson said, "No, I want this Philistine woman to be my wife." Well, his parents gave in, even though they probably didn't think it was a great idea. And the Bible does say that they did not know that this was actually from the Lord, because the Lord was looking for a way to start the process of Samson freeing the people from the Philistines. So they had to go back and forth and visit with the woman and her family in order to arrange the marriage. So they would travel back and forth. And one day when Samson was traveling, and his parents, they were traveling to see her, and his parents had gone on ahead, and Samson was walking along by himself, and suddenly something very surprising happened. A lion came out of nowhere and attacked. Let me get this right. It attacked Samson. And Samson, can you imagine a huge lion attacking you and you're all by yourself? But it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson at that moment, and he had so much strength that he was able to attack that lion, and he tore it to pieces with his bare hands, it says, just like it was just some young, tiny little goat or something. It was no problem for him. He just attacked that lion, and he tore it to pieces. Right? And so there was the lion carcass. He left it lying there by the side of the road where he had killed it, and he went on ahead. But he didn't tell anyone at all about what had happened. So they kept visiting, and finally they arranged for Samson to marry this woman. And so on the day when he was going to celebrate his wedding to this woman, when he was going to the start of the wedding feast, he was walking along again, and he saw that lion carcass lying on the ground. And he saw something very surprising, which was that some bees had come, and they had actually built a beehive inside the lion's carcass, which was probably just bones at this point. And the bees had built this hive, and there was honey inside the beehive. And so Samson reached down and he scooped out some delicious honey. Do you guys like honey? I do. And he ate it up. And it was delicious. And so he took some more of the honey and he gave it to his parents, but he didn't tell anyone at all where he had gotten the honey from. So when Samson got to his wedding feast, he was feeling very happy and excited, and his wife was there too, but she was off celebrating with the women, so she was off. And he had 30 Philistine men with him to help him celebrate. Okay, so I only have 2, but he actually had 30 with him. Okay, and they were celebrating and they were having fun. And Samson said to them, suddenly he turned to them and he said, listen, I have a riddle that I want to tell you, but I want to make a bet about the riddle. And the Philistines said, okay, like what kind of a bet do you want to make? And Samson said, well, I'm going to tell you the riddle, and if you can guess the answer to the riddle by the end of this wedding feast, which will be in 7 days and 7 nights, that's how long the wedding feast was going to last. He said, if you can guess it by the end of those 7 days and 7 nights, then I will give you all 30 linen shirts and 30 sets of clothes. Now that's a lot. That would have cost a lot of money at that time, okay? And he said, but if you can't guess it, then you have to give me 30 linen shirts and 30 sets of clothes. And the Philistines, they thought, well, we're pretty smart. We can probably guess this riddle in 7 days and 7 nights. And so they decided, sure, we'll take your bet. And so Samson looked at them and he said, here's my riddle. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Did you hear that? He said, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. What is this? So the Philistines started to think. And they were thinking and thinking and thinking. And for 3 days and 3 nights, they thought and thought and thought, and they could not figure out the answer. They couldn't even come close to figuring out the answer. And they started to get worried because they didn't want to have to give all these clothes to Samson. So they thought to themselves, well, we don't seem to be able to figure this out on our own, but I know we have a way we could figure it out. And what they did was they went to Samson's wife, who, you remember, was also a Philistine. So they went to her and they said, listen, that husband of yours told us this riddle and we can't figure it out. Now you better figure it out for us. You better get him to tell you what it is and then tell us, because otherwise something really bad might happen to you and your family. We might just do something really bad to you guys because he's going to make us poor if we have to give him all those clothes. So you better do what we say and you better find out the answer for that riddle for us. So she was scared, right? She didn't want anything bad to happen to her family. And so she went to Samson, and she didn't tell him that the Philistines were trying to trick him. Instead, she just tried to get the answer out of him. So she said, Samson, don't you love me? Don't you want to tell me the answer to your riddle? Why won't you tell me? I'm your wife. You should tell me the answer. And Samson said, what? I haven't even told my parents the answer to that riddle. Why would I tell you? But she just kept on going, and every day she would cry to him and say, Samson, please, I'm your wife. Don't you love me? Won't you tell me the answer to the riddle? Please, please. So finally he got so tired of listening to her cry and complain and whine that finally he gave in, and he told her the answer to the riddle. Now, do you guys know what the answer to the riddle is? Well, this is what he told her. He told her about the lion with the honey in it. He said that there was this lion carcass that he got honey in it, and that was the answer to the riddle. And so she was so happy that she knew the answer now, and she went back and told the Philistines what the answer was so that they could tell him, and now they were happy. So on the 7th day of the feast, they came to Samson, and he was sure they weren't going to be able to guess this riddle, but they had a surprise for him, and they said, oh, Samson, we know the answer to your riddle. And he said, no. And they said, yes. What is stronger than a lion? What is sweeter than honey? And Samson was so shocked and angry because he knew there was only one way they could have figured out the answer to that riddle. So he said, what? If you hadn't tricked my wife, you never would have figured out that riddle. And he stormed off because he was so mad, and the Philistines were kind of laughing to themselves. But he stormed off and he left his wife behind, and he was in fact so angry that at the Philistines that what he did was he went to a different group of Philistines and he killed 30 of them, and he took their clothes and their linen shirts and he gave those to the Philistines he had made the bet with, because he knew he had to pay the bet, and that was the way he decided to do it. So the Philistines were angry about this, of course, and Samson was still angry. He went back to his parents' house, but then one day he decided it had been quite a while since he had seen his wife, and he decided he was going to go back to the Philistines and ask to see his wife. So he did that. He went back to them, and he went to her house, and he knocked on the door, and her father answered, and he said, "So I've come to see my wife." And her father said, "Well, I'm sorry, Samson, but I can't let you see her because actually we thought you didn't love her anymore when you left, and so we gave her to somebody else to marry." And he said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, sorry, she's married to somebody else now." And he once again was so angry, even more angry now. And he said, "Well, if this is the way that they're going to treat me, then I'm going to really get back at them now." So this is what he did with his amazing strength, right? He went and he caught 300 foxes. Can you show us our fox, Jean? There you go. There's a fox. It's much bigger than Samson. The foxes weren't really that big. But he caught 300 foxes, and he took them and he put them in pairs, and he tied their tails together. Okay? That's good, Jean. Thank you. He tied their tails together, and then in between their tails, he took a little bit of burning wood, and he attached it to the tails, and then he sent the foxes out into the fields of the Philistines where they were growing their crops. And so the foxes ran all through the fields, and they burned up all of the Philistines' crops that they were growing. And so now the Philistines had no food to eat. So they were now even more angry at Samson. So Samson went and he hid out in a cave. He went there, and the Philistines decided they had to go find where he was. And so they came to the Israelites. Here they are. And they said, the Israelites were scared because the Philistines were stronger than the Israelites, and they were ruling over the Israelites, and the Israelites were scared. And they said, "What are you doing here?" And the Philistines said, "We've come to find Samson because we want to do to him what he did to us." And the Israelites said, "Well, we don't really, okay, we'll go find him for you. You just wait here." They knew where he was. So the Israelites, now here are Israelites. It was the father before, but let's just say he's an Israelite now. The Israelites came, and they knew where Samson was hiding, so they came to him. And they said, "Samson, what have you done? Don't you know that the Philistines are rulers over us? They could destroy us. What have you done?" And Samson said, "Well, I just did to them what they did to me." And they said, the Israelites said, "Well, I'm sorry, Samson, but we've come to tie you up and take you to the Philistines because we're just too scared about what they might do to us if we just leave you here, because we think they're going to try and get back at all of us if we don't bring you to them." And Samson said, "Well, I guess that's okay with me as long as you promise me one thing. You have to promise me that you're not going to kill me right here yourselves." And they said, "No, Samson, we're not going to do that. We just want to tie you up and take you to the Philistines." Samson said, "Okay then, go ahead and tie me up." And so the Israelites had some very strong rope, and they used it to tie Samson all up. And they tied him so tight, they thought there was no way Samson was ever going to get out of that rope. Okay? So he's totally tied up and secured, and they take him to the Philistines. And as they're going to the Philistines see him coming, and they're so happy to see that they've got him that they come running and shouting towards him, right? They're probably planning to kill him right there. But Samson, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. He got so much power in him at that moment that he was able to just burst out of the ropes that they had wrapped around him. He just completely burst out of them, and he was able to kill the Philistines. And what he did was he picked up the jawbone of a donkey that was lying on the ground. He picked that up, and with just that jawbone and his own strength that God had given him at that moment, he killed 1,000 Philistines at that moment. And when he was done, he looked around him and he said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, I have made donkeys of them. with the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. And he threw the jawbone aside. And after that happened, he was very thirsty. And so he prayed to God and he said, God, I'm so thirsty. I feel like I might die after what I just did. Are you going to let me die of thirst and fall into the hands of the Philistines? And God heard him, and he miraculously made a spring appear right where Samson was, and the water came bubbling out of the ground, and Samson took it and he drank and he was revived. And the Bible tells us that Samson ruled the Israelites for 20 years after this happened. So that is the end of our story today. And like I said, I gave your parents a list of some different things you could do if you want to think more about this story. And one thing that you could do that I know we do in children's church sometimes is you could just draw a picture of something that you remember right now. Just go right now and get a piece of paper and some crayons or colored pencils or pencil, whatever you want to use, and just draw a picture of one thing that you remember from the story. Or you could make like a little cartoon of some of the different events that you remember from the story. You can always go look back at the story in the Bible to remind yourself of it, or ask your parents to read it with you again from a children's Bible you have or from the Bible itself. And I told this story to Lucy and Jane, and they both drew some pictures, so they want to show them to you now, okay? So here's Jane's picture. You have to hold it up close, Jane. There it is. You can see Samson there. That's what she wanted to draw. You can see him with his big beard and his long, long hair. He's very strong, right?
And he has broken out.
Oh, right. There's the rope on the ground around him, because that's right after he broke out of the rope when the Israelites tied him up to bring him to the Philistines. Thanks, Jane. And then Lucy has one. There's Lucy's. She drew the angel ascending up to heaven in the flame, and there's Manoah and his wife over here, and the angel's telling them that they're going to have a child too. Okay, so those were the things that they remembered. So it would be great if you guys want to draw pictures yourselves or do any of the other activities I suggested.